We begin with Tunisia's biggest political crisis since the 2011 revolution that introduced democracy. President Kais Saied has sacked the government, including the Prime Minister Hisham Mashishi, and frozen parliament for 30 days. The military have been deployed to the government palace and stopped all workers from entering the building. The biggest political group, Ennahda Party, is calling it a coup. Well, this is the scene in the capital, Tunis. Demonstrators from both sides of the political divide were outside Parliament. In the past hour, security forces stormed the offices of Al Jazeera and kicked the staff out of the building. The military is blocking the Speaker of Parliament, Rashid Ghannouchi, from entering the building. He remains in his car, surrounded by supporters. Sarah Khairat begins our coverage with this report.
Celebrations on the streets of Tunisia's capital, Tunis, in the hours after the president dismisses the prime minister and freezes parliament for 30 days.
It's the first time in my life I've heard the head of a state make a right decision. We've taken our country back. This is the first time we are out on the streets to celebrate.
President Kais Saied's supporters made their way through the streets, welcoming news of political change. Earlier, thousands had protested in several cities about government failures and crippling coronavirus rates. Crowds shouted slogans against the ruling Ennahda Party and Prime Minister Hisham Mashishi, calling for the dissolution of parliament and chanting "Down with the regime."
We have come down today to resist this regime. They take our money and curse us. They have not done anything to the people always fighting. It is enough. How can 9 ministers rule an entire country? We have starved and the people are lost.
Police blocked all streets leading to the city's main thoroughfare, using tear gas to break up the crowds. It was a key site for the Tunisian revolution a decade ago that toppled longtime president Zain al-Abidine Ben Ali and unleashed the Arab Spring uprisings. Soon after, the president called an emergency meeting, saying the measures were needed to save the country.
The first decision is to freeze all the powers of the parliament. The constitution does not allow the parliament to be dissolved, but it does not stand in the way of freezing all its work. The second decision is to lift the immunity of all members of parliament, and for those of whom a case is related to, I will take care over the public prosecution.
But critics, including the Speaker of Parliament, have called the president's actions a coup.
These decisions have no basis in the Constitution nor in the law, and we are against them, because in short, it is a coup against the Constitution, a coup against the revolution, and a coup against public and private liberties in the country. The president made a misinterpretation that actually clashes with the reality.
There has been a rivalry between the President, Prime Minister and Speaker that's prevented action to tackle surging unemployment and crumbling state services. Tunisia has also been overwhelmed by the coronavirus pandemic, facing one of Africa's worst outbreaks. Hospitals are overcrowded and under-resourced, and on Saturday, Tunisia reported a record 317 deaths from the virus. To many, the country's deepening economic and social problems have undermined support for democracy. Some critics say that very democracy is now in danger. Sarah Khairat, Al Jazeera.
Security forces dressed in civilian clothes stormed the offices of Al Jazeera in Tunis. They asked all journalists to turn off their phones and then remove the staff from the building. We spoke to Al Jazeera's Tunis bureau chief, Lutfi Haji, about the situation.
What happened is the security forces stormed Al Jazeera offices in Tunis and asked the staff to leave the office. They prevent the staff from even taking their personal belongings, and they said that they represent the security defense in Tunisia. I asked him if he has a judiciary permit, and he said no, we don't have this, but these are the instructions of the Home Ministry, despite the fact that we have laws in Tunisia and they cannot do that. Our conception, this is not fair. This is against fairness because it doesn't depend on a judiciary ruling. Until now, we don't know the fate of us. They have the office, they have the keys, and we will go to the judiciary and we will see what will happen later. Security forces are surrounding the office and the vicinity of the office, and they are upstairs as well. They prevent anyone to enter the office of Al Jazeera, and they prevent us from even having our personal belongings or the computers. They prevent anyone to take anything from the office. There is a new decision which is not fair, and this might develop into other actions, because in Tunisia during the last 10 years we get used to the freedom of press, freedom of work, respect of law.
Let's go to Mohammed Val. He's covered Tunisia extensively for us. He joins us now. Mohammed, let's start with the question of the constitutionality of the situation. Does it give the president the right to do what he's done?
Well, Sami, according to, if you look at Article 80 of the Constitution, it allows the president to take some emergency measures if the security of the nation is under threat, and if the situation is deteriorating for the country as a whole, the interests of the nation and the security of people and so on. However, the president cannot take those measures without consultation with the government, without consultation with the other branches of the government, including the parliament. But what we have right now is the president has frozen the parliament, he has sacked the government, and there was no consultation prior to that. So this is why the opponents of the president say that this is unconstitutional. Rashid al-Ghannouchi, the Speaker of the Parliament, described it as a coup. Also, the body that should be allowed, that is empowered to resolve this kind of disputes, doesn't exist. The Constitutional Court has never been formed. So these are aspects of the crisis in Tunisia that have been accumulating over the last few years, and actually over the last decade, we can say. And now they've reached a head. And most concerning in this regard is the silence since yesterday night of the president himself. We have demonstrations in the streets. We have the military out in the streets, and they are blocking entry to buildings, to government buildings. We have acts of silencing the media, like what happened to Al Jazeera. Lots of spots of silence there that are very concerning to the public and to the international community as well. What's going on? Something is going on behind the scenes and we don't know about it. And that's very, very dangerous.
Right, Mohammed, I'm going to ask you to stay with us because we've got on the line, we're going to go to Ahmed Al-Ali. He joins us on the line from Tunis. Ahmed, it looks like the situation is deteriorating since the last time we spoke. What's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, now there are clashes between the demonstrators, both sides, both groups. We got people wounded, and we can see blood. And this is a bad sign, really. And the other, I mean, really shocking news, it's the shutdown of Al Jazeera bureau, you know. It's a bad sign. It's a very bad sign. So, I mean, we, as journalists, we had lots of accusations since the revolution. We were reporting freely. I mean, sometimes problems occurred, but not in this way. We never heard. I mean, this belonged to Ben Ali era. I mean, when he used to shut down media bureaus. And now, I mean, we are asking ourselves, we are wondering what will happen next. I mean, it's a really bad sign. I mean, shutting down the Al Jazeera bureau. Maybe, we don't know what's the intention behind it. So everybody really is concerned for the freedom of expression and press liberty.
Ahmed, I just heard you say you were referring to clashes and you said we can see blood. Can you please explain what you meant by that?
Okay, because we saw, blood. People were attacking each other with stones, with bottle of waters, and lots of people got wounded. Not killed, no casualties so far. And this is a good thing, but,
Is this, Ahmed, are we talking
deteriorating.
about clashes between the different protesters, civilians, or are we talking about...
Yes.
Okay, please go on.
Between the civilians, the policemen, in the early morning hours succeeded to disperse them, to be in the middle, to calm down the situation. But now it looks like the situation is out of the control. And as long as we see this, there are lots of concerns.
Okay, that was Ahmed Al-Ali there explaining to us the latest escalating situation on the ground, where apparently we're now hearing about clashes between rival protesters that seem to have heated up. Well, you might ask, what's led to this political turmoil? Let's bring you some background on this. In 2011, Tunisia's first free and fair election saw the Ennahda party win a majority in parliament, with Monsef Marzouki as president. Protests started again the following year and have happened periodically ever since. People have been unhappy about the high levels of unemployment. The 2014 parliamentary election didn't help fix the economic woes. Tunisia is still trying to secure a new loan from the International Monetary Fund. Attacks on foreign tourists in 2015 hurt the tourism-reliant economy even more. Well, by 2020, after months of failed attempts to form a government, a new Prime Minister, Elias Fakhfakh, was brought in. He was forced out later in the year over a corruption scandal, though. Anti-government protesters were back on the streets again on Sunday. The mishandling of the pandemic has exacerbated the difficult living conditions for millions who've been calling for support from those in power. Max Gelian is a political scientist specializing in the Middle East and North Africa at the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex. He joins us by Skype from Freiburg in Germany. Good to have you with us. So the latest lines talk about how the Speaker of Parliament has been calling on the President to reverse his decision. Do you think the President will be listening to that?
I imagine he'll be listening to it. I doubt he'll be following it. I don't think that is an unsurprising call, but it is the logical call for the Speaker of Parliament to make. It is a logical call for Parliament to not accept its freezing. But there seems to be a larger kind of plan in place, and including obviously the very, very worrying attack against your colleagues in Tunis. That does not make me think that this will be walked back too quickly. That being said, there are political forces within Tunisia, and this includes the labor unions. This includes wider civil society organizations, and this includes the remaining forces of parliament that can push back against this. And I think that can still affect how this is going to play out. So this is still very much a developing situation, and I think it'll be important to keep that in mind in the next couple of days.
How worrying is it now when you look at the escalation that's happening, that now Al Jazeera's offices have been, shall we say, visited by the authorities, closed down, the journalists kicked out, the sort of posture that we're seeing being taken on the streets? It doesn't bode well for a sort of, shall we say, normal civilian evolution.
It really doesn't, and I think that's why looking at these developing events is really, really critical. There's one discussion around what the president announced yesterday and whether that is legal within the Article 80 of the Constitution, which it's not, but that's one discussion. And then I think there's what's happening today, and very, very few good events start with plainclothes security officers taking away the phones of people at Al Jazeera. So I think looking at that today, looking at the behavior of security forces today will be really, really critical. Especially as we talk about clashes on the street, it's also important to mention that the Tunisian police has a history of violence against protesters and violence against civilians, which we've seen protests about in the last couple of days as well. So I think looking at the role of the security forces here is critical. It's also really difficult and important to be cautious in how we interpret these events in the street in the coming days. There's support for what's happening by some protesters. And I think that is in itself important to recognize. It is an indication that the political system so far has failed Tunisians, and the absolutely disastrous COVID crisis that the country is going through right now is an indication of that, alongside high unemployment and a deep economic crisis. But also not everybody's on the street, and not being on the street right now is not consenting to what's happening. So I think evaluating more deeply how this sits in public opinion, but also in the opinion of Tunisia's key institutions, is going to be the key thing that determines how this develops moving forward.
All right, thank you very much. Good to get your analysis on that. Let's go to Tunis-based journalist Rabab Alawi now, joins us from there. So now we're looking at a situation where we're hearing of clashes between protesters on the street, indicative perhaps of how deep divisions run within Tunisian society towards what the president has done.
Yes, so right now the situation is so critical, especially right now, while clashes are between protesters who are supporting the majority leading parties in the parliament, Nahda Qalb Tunis and Al-Karama coalition, and on the other side, protesters who are supporting Kais Saied decisions to fall off the government. So I think the situation is so critical. We need to be more vigilant. At the same time, as a journalist, I'm afraid, I'm confused when I saw the police officers who stormed the office of Al Jazeera channels. Unfortunately, these images remind me Ben Ali's regime when he used to imprison journalists and when he used to prohibit international channels. So I'm a little bit confused now. I think freedom of expression and freedom of press is really threatened right now. And at the same time, some journalists, I joined them this morning. They told me that they find it difficult to take some picture of the protesters. So I think we need to be more vigilant right now.
And that segues into what I was going to ask you. Does the clampdown that's taking place against journalists, the closure of Al Jazeera's office, is that indicative that the army is not going to try and remain neutral in this, that it is taking, if not a stance that could be described as very dictatorial, but at least a stance that is favorable towards the president?
Until now, the army are neutral and objective. And when I talked to some of them, they told me we are just executing what President Kais Saied said. We don't take any parts or any political parties. But at the same time, as I witnessed it this morning, I saw that they are trying to stay just in the middle between the protesters, between Nahda supporters and Kais Saied supporters. I mean, the clashes aren't between the army and the protesters. The clashes are between the both sides of the protesters.
And what about the role of the National Labour Union? How critical is that right now?
So they are now handling a meeting. We don't know their reaction, but I think they will support Kais Saied decisions. They always supported him. And when they called for a national dialogue last November to solve this political crisis, they said that they will stay and support President Kais Saied against Nahda party and the majority leading parties in the parliament. I think probably they will take also the Kais Saied side. But at the same time, I'm surprised because some political parties who supported President Kais Saied during the elections in 2019, now they are against them, like the Democratic Current, who now spoke to express their disappointment to see this decision, to see the chapter 18 from the constitution enacted right now. They described their reaction as shocked and confused. So I think there is also division in the opposition. But for the labor that now they are in a meeting, so we don't know yet. But probably they will take position with President Kais Saied.
All right, thank you very much for giving us your observations of what's happening there.
Thank you.
A short while ago, security forces dressed in civilian clothes stormed the offices of Al Jazeera in Tunis. They asked all journalists to turn off their phones. They removed everyone from the building, and we spoke to Al Jazeera's Tunis bureau chief at the time, Lutfi Haji, about the situation.
What happened is the security forces stormed Al Jazeera offices in Tunis and asked the staff to leave the office. They prevent the staff from even taking their personal belongings, and they said that they represent the security defense in Tunisia. I asked him if he has a judiciary permit, and he said no, we don't have this, but these are the instructions of the Home Ministry, despite the fact that we have laws in Tunisia and they cannot do that. Our conception, this is not fair. This is against fairness because it doesn't depend on a judiciary ruling. Until now, we don't know the fate of us. They have the office, they have the keys, and we will go to the judiciary and we will see what will happen later. Security forces are surrounding the office and the vicinity of the office, and they are upstairs as well. They prevent anyone to enter the office of Al Jazeera, and they prevent us from even having our personal belongings or the computers. They prevent anyone to take anything from the office. There is a new decision which is not fair, and this might develop into other actions, because in Tunisia during the last 10 years we get used to the freedom of press, freedom of work, respect of law.
Pauline Adesmavel is spokesperson for Reporters Without Borders. She says they're staying vigilant of any attacks on media outlets in Tunisia.
You could see the signs of the coup in the last few days, when they showed some doctors or directors of hospitals crying because of lack of oxygen in hospitals, and other, theatrical acts to pave the way for the decision of the president. There are no grounds, no reasons for the president to resort to such draconian measures. If it's the corona is an international phenomenon which all countries, big and small, couldn't really control. If it is a matter of tourism, yes, the corona and lack of tourists affected the Tunisian economy. So the president chose, like many dictators, like the fascists before the Second World War, they play on the emotions of the people and on the misery of the people, and they always find a party to blame. And in this instance, the president wants to show that the presidential system is the best, because he always declared that he wanted the presidential system, claiming that because he was voted by a high percentage, therefore he should have supremacy over parliament. As a professor himself of constitutional law, no, this is not the case at all.
Well, Fadel Ali Reza is editor-in-chief of Mishkal, a Tunisia news and analysis website. He says it's a big question of debate among Tunisians as to whether the president's move is constitutional.
We've seen already both critics and supporters taking to the media in the last several hours some who are saying that it's anti-constitutional, perhaps an overzealous interpretation of Article 80. People are reading the article over and over again to see exactly what powers the president does have at this moment. We saw a video shared by Ennahda's social media. It had Rashid Nushi trying to get into Parliament very late last night, at about 3 in the morning. They were confronted by members of the military who were there blocking the entrance. There was an argument between them. The military said that they were following orders, that they could not open the doors to them, that they had closed off Parliament to them in accordance with the president's decision to freeze Parliament. The president said he doesn't have the power to dissolve Parliament, but he did have the power to freeze Parliament's activities for 1 month. There's also a question whether it will be temporary and what will happen in this 1 month period. But certainly Ennahda and its supporters, who have quite a lot to lose, are against that. There have been attacks on Ennahda headquarters. Police forces actually defended the headquarters from people who had gone there to attack the headquarters. They had used tear gas. We saw a video that our reporter had shared very late at night, showing that security forces were trying to protect the Ennahda headquarters. So there is a role of the security forces to try and play as much of a neutral role as possible.
Let's go to Mohammed Val, who's covered Tunisia extensively for us. Mohammed, let's break this down and ask some basics here. First of all, who does the president represent? Is this one of those situations in which you can say this is an attempt by the old guard to try and take back power?
Well, Sami, Tunisian President Kais Saied has always claimed that he represents the people of Tunisia. And probably this is what he relies on in what he did yesterday. He relied on this particular aspect of the Constitution, because probably one of the first articles of the Constitution was that the source of sovereignty in the Constitution is the people of Tunisia. So he's using that to say that what he does is for the interest of the people of Tunisia, and that his support came from the people of Tunisia. They elected him from no particular political party, and he's relying on this to interpret every action he takes constitutionally. But his opponents are saying that, yes, that's the broad picture of things, but there are details, and he did not stick to those details, including, for instance, the fact that he should coordinate with the other branches of power before taking a decision like the one he took yesterday night. Article 80 stipulates that he should consult with the government and consult with the parliament before he takes a decision within the realm of emergency, like within that scope of emergency measures that the president is allowed to take constitutionally to help prevent a problem or a situation that could affect the interest of the nation or the security of the nation.
All right, let's talk about another contextual question here. Unemployment increased this year, Mohammed, to almost 20%. Poverty remains high at around 15%. GDP fell in the first quarter of this year. The background to this, successive governments failing to revive the economy?
That's absolutely the case. That's where Kais Saied takes his powers and what he considers the legitimacy of what he does. He says that the fact that these governments failed to serve the Tunisian people is enough reason for him to depose them. He considers that the number one criterion for any government, a government is appointed in order to serve the people, in order to solve the problem of unemployment, in order to prevent a health crisis like the one that Tunisia is living now. And for him, they failed miserably in that respect, and that's enough reason for him to depose them. And he has announced that he's going to appoint a new government in the next few hours, but we are waiting for him to do that. The people of Tunisia are waiting for him, and they don't know where is he going to bring these government members from which party, from which base. So he's leaving the country waiting for any developments in the next few hours. And if no announcement is made, that is going to be a source of grave concern if the president doesn't show up and if he doesn't tweet or send a message to the people in the next few hours. It's going to probably cause an escalation on the streets, because We have seen these confrontations. We have seen people wounded. The military is still standing by, but not absolutely, because they have blocked government buildings, and security forces are doing actions of the type we have seen against the Al Jazeera bureau. So things are little by little getting out of control if no voice from the president, if no sound, if no message comes from the president himself.
And one imagines appointing a new government, a new prime minister, without a process, without elections, without even the parliament being... That's not going to help the divisions go away, one imagines.
Exactly, that's what I have just said. He said he's going to keep the situation like this for a month. And during that month, he's going to accumulate all the powers, all the different powers of the government, the three branches, in his own hands. Is he going to be able to do this? We have to look at the factors of power, the basis on which he could do this. He should have the army on his side. He should have the labor unions on his side. He should have a huge majority of people protesting in the streets on his side. And these are the factors that we should observe during the next few hours and next few days. If he has those factors, probably he will be able to push his reforms or his decisions.
All right, thanks so much, Mohammed Val.